when you talk about addiction, the biggest addiction issue I think the AFL have when players are playing is gambling.
Oh, 100%. We've had Alan Christensen on talking about that. Amazing to hear. Crazy.
Yeah. So the alcohol is a component of it. You know, I don't know whether you can become addicted to alcohol really quickly. I think alcohol is that longer term addiction.
100%.
That's why you see alcoholics come in as 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, because they've, you know, worn it out, they functioned and so forth. Gambling for, you know, the guys may use some coke or some pills or whatever. That's, you know, neither here nor there. But the gambling situation, when they do have accessible funds, like that is really dangerous. And I'm sure you agree with what I'm about to say, Jack, as in it doesn't matter, well, for me, I should say, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's gambling, whether it's meth, whether it's amphetamines, whether it's cannabis, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex, whether it's running, you know, whether it's shopping, whatever it is, like because I've crossed that line into addiction, I've got to be careful of all those other things.
100%.
And like swapping the witch for the bitch type thing.
Boom. Welcome, everybody, to another show of Real Drug Talk. Now, today, it's been a bit of a day for everyone listening. We're actually recording quite a few episodes on the one day because, as the listenership knows, I'm not having the baby, but my wife, thankfully, my wife's having a baby anytime now. So we need some content for the next couple of weeks. And the last few shows that we've done has been with people that have been a big part of my journey. And today I'm really excited because I don't know if you know this, Gav, but I got like sober and clean at like around the same time as Gav. He was a little bit in front of me, and being a kind of a young bloke that used to play sport and stuff, Gav was just like a fucking god to me, you know? And I just thought it was like unbelievable that this, like, you know, AFL superstar player was like kind of on the same journey as me and talking about it and stuff. And it had a massive impact on me, you know, continuing on in my journey and stuff. So pretty cool to kind of speak to him. Now, I'm actually going to let Gav, so we got Gavin Corsica on today. How you going, mate?
I'm good, Jack. How are you, mate?
Pretty good. Now I'm gonna let you give yourself a bit of a introduction and a bit of a bio because I fuck things up. I kind of briefly know that you play footy and all that stuff, but give us the details.
Well, after that spiel about when you first came into treatment and I guess the 12-step fellowship, mate, and how much of an icon I was for you, I thought you would have been able to spiel off all these really nice things about me.
Well, thankfully, I kind of know recovery, Gav. So yeah.
So when's your birthday? What's your day?
So my clean date and recovery date is the 25th of July. 2011.
Okay, you're coming up to 10 years. So I just celebrated the 10 years. So you're very close to me. I thought you were a year behind me, but that's fine. Yeah.
I think off memory, you're about five months in front or 6 months or something. Is that right?
But about 25 years of real age.
That's right.
That's the scary part.
That's right. Yeah. So for everyone listening that doesn't know, Gav was a premiership player for the Pies. What year was that premiership? So
I played 246 games from 1987 to the year 2000. I was blessed to be a part of the 1990 premiership team. That was a great experience for us and also Collingwood supporters, obviously.
Yeah.
So had that career. Also had my addiction that I was battling with and dealing with throughout that. Fortunately, went into some coaching afterwards. So I transitioned from my footy career into assistant coaching and had that ambition to coach senior footy.
Yeah.
But when I retired, my drug situation escalated, and I managed to fake my way through about 8 years of coaching.
Yeah.
And then, a couple of years after that, I found myself in treatment and recovery. But the footy career was obviously a huge part of my life, and Collingwood are still a part of that inherent family that I relate to, I guess.
Love it. And I'm interested to talk a little bit about that. So, and your coaching, was that at the Blues mainly? Or was it a few different places?
I had a few different clubs. Unfortunately, each club I went to as an assistant, the senior coach got sacked after a couple of years. So they generally, wipe the slate and renew it and rejig it. So I had a couple of years at the Kangaroos initially, then went to Hawthorn. Then I coached North Ballarat in the VFL on my own for a couple of years, and then went to Carlton after that. So the Blue Baggers, that was an interesting experience.
So this is like, just for everyone listening, like I think this is why, not the whole thing, but like a really big part of why Gav's story is so interesting to me and to so many, and kind of in a few different aspects, in terms of stigma, in terms of just like, impacting particularly, I reckon, like young men and providing hope and just people in general. Because like I really remember it. So I went to the same rehab, Malvern Private, as you. But as I said, I think it was 5 months after. So I didn't know, but met you in like 12-step fellowships. And it is amazing. There was quite a few people as well. Like even as someone that kind of used drugs, like you hear different stuff out in the community of different people that, have like some level of kind of fame or influence or whatever, that use drugs or whatever. But you just like, unless you like encounter it when you're using drugs, you just don't think that it kind of happens, And it was like, in a way, it was a really like sobering thought to think like, oh, fuck. Like if this guy's like doing it, it must be a good thing. Like, have you found that your stories had that impact on a lot of people?
Yeah, look, and you're spot on, Jack. And I guess when I came in, my entire 28-year drug and alcohol career, the alcohol wasn't a secret, obviously, because it's a legal thing that we can do out in the public, obviously. But the drug use was that one thing I was really embarrassed and ashamed about. And, it was started with cannabis when I was a 16-year-old. And I had that through with me until the 5th of May, 2011. It escalated into amphetamines when I retired, although I dabbled with that during my playing career, but it was more just a bit of a social thing with that. So when I went into treatment, once that secret was out, and first of all, it was obviously admitting all this stuff to my wife, who had no knowledge of it. The counsellors and the guys I was involved with at the residential rehab I was in basically said, you've got an opportunity here to be able to spread the message and share what we the lived experience, and it's not just a lived experience from a general person per se, and I say that without any ego whatsoever, but from a footy profile, there's 80,000 Collingwood supporters out there, and there's hundreds of thousands of footy supporters that would have seen me, and don't worry, I would have got judged initially by many, but there was certainly obviously a real compassionate feeling from it as well. And like when I went to 12-step meetings, especially when the ego was dropped and I was just a vulnerable 42-year-old male who was broken internally and was trying to get well and do things differently. I think that really resonated with many. And I remember, even still now it happens, but back in the first 3 or 4 years, if I went to an AA meeting, I had people that come up to me afterwards and say, Gav, I saw the show that you did with Eddie Maguire when I first came out, and mind you, I look back at that and think, oh my God, how bad I was. But the impact that has, and the ability to be able to just share, what happened for me, and it was like me when I first went to Malvern. Like I sat in a room, with the 30 people there, doing process groups, and every time someone spoke, I thought they were speaking about me. I thought, how do you know that? And that's exactly what I did. That's exactly what I thought. That's how I felt. And that's how I medicated. I basically medicated all that internal mess with what suited me. So that's really nice to hear. And like when people come up to you and say, it's awesome, that's great, I'm now doing 12-step meetings, or I went to rehab because I saw that, that's really impactful on me as well. So being able to utilise the profile I have to benefit others is a huge thing.
100%. And it's so interesting what you said there about, like the thoughts and feelings part of it, because that was my experience as well, is that, and I think that's the thing that we got to talk a little bit more about just out there about like lived experience stuff, is that it's not this, like people always misunderstand it, professionals and stuff. It's not the fucking story really. Like the people that I relate to, I don't really care what their story is, or I don't come from the same background or I don't get it. It makes it more special if you do, or you look up to the person or whatever. But when someone actually is able to intimately describe to you how they're thinking and feeling, and it's the exact same as how you think and feel, and particularly in those early days when, you know, you don't speak to anyone and you don't know, you think you're the only person in the world that thinks and feels like that. It's fucking mind-boggling, and it's so powerful, and that's what makes a lot of shifts. So yeah, it's interesting you say that. So just quickly, can you give us the 3-minute snapshot of your story then, like all tied up within that professional career, like drugs, how did you get into it? You mentioned a little bit how it played out. You kept it hidden from your wife. Like, that's amazing, you know, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, look, well, I've only learnt this over the last 10 years. I wholeheartedly believe in the genetic component of addiction where it can be handed down, because I relate to those people that talk about being restless, irritable and discontent. And that's before we pick up. And I felt like that as a kid.
Right.
I felt like a square peg in a round hole, just didn't feel like I fit in, was uncomfortable, anxious, I was a worrier, all that sort of stuff. And the only time I didn't feel that way was when I started playing footy, was the first one.
Right.
As a 7 or 8 year old. So I had a few hours a week where I actually felt comfortable with who I was.
Why do you think that was, like with footy? Like, if you were to relate it to drugs, is it the taking yourself out of yourself kind of aspect and just concentrating on footy while you're there, or?
Look, I haven't looked that far into that, Jack, but I think it's also a part of that self-esteem and self-worth. You know, my dad was an alcoholic and was never in our family life, and I never had that male role model to look up to. And I look back now and I think of the way I played. I was a really desperate, aggressive, coachable player. And I know for a fact now that I played that way because I was looking for the accolades and the feedback from the coaches, from that male role model.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was the first part of it. And then, you know, as soon as I picked up cannabis or alcohol to start with, and cannabis a few months later, that was what medicated me basically. And I thought, this is awesome. And, you know, from the first time I smoked dope, I smoked it daily. And, you know, until I came into treatment. So that was the beginning of it. And I used differently. I drank differently. All those things that we hear about. I wasn't, you know, the normal drug user that would just have a go on the weekend. It was just the day after I experienced cannabis, I was straight on the phone to this bloke that I knew had it. I said, mate, can you get me more? And then it continued. And I was over that 28 years, I was never a real hard binger. I'm not sure. I can't remember your part of your story, Jack, but I was a grazer. And it was partly because I knew I had to manage and had to function. So footy was really important, obviously. And then I knew, you know, once the cannabis continued down here in Melbourne when I moved from Queensland, I knew that I had to, you know, keep track of it, so to speak, and manage what I was doing. And cannabis was probably the best one out of all of them, even, you know, before alcohol, where I could have a few joints at night time and calm the nerves and go to sleep and wake up and be okay. I wasn't smoking cones every day, all day. I certainly did that at during breaks and periods or days off. I certainly would write myself off and get myself wrecked. But it was a really interesting transformation, I guess, with my drug use, because it was, I went from being single and living Furniture Gully on my own to then having a partner that I then had to keep it secret from. And I guess one thing, I smoked cigarettes all through my footy career, so that was the mask. I could sneak out into my golf bag, and I could do what I need to do out there and keep it secretive. So then through my footy career, the cannabis was real. Alcohol over the weekends was pretty standard, like most guys, and then amphetamine snuck in. And the reasoning behind the amphetamine use was simply because I was drinking a lot, and again, that was keeping me sober. So it was all about how I was perceived. Again, it was all about the ego and me being able to contain that, because if someone had seen me, if I'd have drank the way I normally drank without some amphetamines in my system, I'd be on the ground, poleaxed. So that was a part of where that secret come from and why I needed to keep it so hidden. And then look, once footy finished, it was just the shackles of the fitness and the boundaries of my football career were released. And amphetamine started straight away. It was the one drug I had experienced that gave me the self-esteem, gave me the confidence. I wasn't a huge communicator, so it allowed me the ability to be able to communicate to whoever. and it was just the drug that worked for me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was moving into professional AFL coaching, but that didn't matter. Again, it was functioning and doing what I needed to do daily just to get through the day, basically, with my, I guess, my internal discomfort. And I struggled there for 8 years with that, but I was on the downhill slide then.
Yeah.
With the amphetamines, you can't use that daily without it becoming a mess for you at some stage. And and then I found myself in treatment a little bit later.
Interesting. So, and in that time, like even using amphetamines, like, because you said at the start, which I found really interesting, and I think this is a misconception, that people using amphetamines and pot and alcohol and this whole like cocktail can, like, as you said, you're on the downhill slope, but for a long time you're kind of somewhat functional with it.
Yeah.
And then B, you kind of hid it from everyone, you said earlier. Like, so how did that all like come out, and how would you actually hide it? I imagine it would be hard and exhausting living like a double life like that the whole time.
You bet. And I've just done an article with Hamish McLaughlin for the Herald Sun this week actually, and spoke about I guess it's almost like that cycle of getting the money, making sure your deal is available to get what you needed, working out how much you needed to get through the day, and all that sort of stuff. And that cycle and that what we do as addicts to get what we need is a ritual basically.
Yeah.
And the keeping it hidden. Oh my God, I reckon there was a dozen times where I'd drop a bag of speed or I'd lose it, or you know what I mean? Like, and this is at home with Nicole, and if had kids, like that panic. It was while I was working full time and had a family full time, my main 100% of the time was actually getting, using, and then keeping it secret from everyone. And mate, it was the hardest. That's a mind fuck completely.
Yeah.
Like I talk about being busy, but not having anything to do. So during the 28 years, I was completely busy, but it's only because my head was busy. I was busy doing nothing basically. Yeah. Except keeping it hidden.
Yeah. Interesting.
It was a whole job in itself. Like, so, even to the extent, Jack, when I was travelling for interstate for footy games, like, because I couldn't. We used to go to Perth for like basically leave Thursday, come back on the red eye Saturday night. So I was a couple of days away without dope. And for me to even think about doing that was just anxiety provoking and a panic attack. So I would prepare. So I'd have my toilet bag. I'd roll the amount of joints that I needed to roll. I'd wrap them in plastic. I'd stick pepper in it or whatever I needed to do to get rid of the smell. I'd spray it with deodorant. So this whole huge cycle, just so I can get over there. I'd have a room on my own. I wouldn't leave the room the whole time we were there. And there were times when when you're at the airport and all the footy bags are lined up and all of a sudden the beagles appear. These little sniffer dogs rock up and they're going over your bags. And mate, I tell you what, the panic that I had several times seeing these dogs, and it wasn't until it was a few years in my recovery that I was told that the beagles are actually fruit dogs. They're not the drug sniffers. So I used to have this panic around my footy bag, and could you imagine the embarrassment? Like Gavin, I'd played for 150 games, and these sniffer dogs sat beside my footy bag because I had 4 or 5 joints in them. Like, it was just like I couldn't allow that to happen. But it was a real panic for me at certain stages. That's for sure.
That's hilarious. Well, it's not hilarious, but it is kind of funny as well.
It is now, mate. It wasn't then.
And I think, it's such an interesting insight and window that you kind of open up for people just to see the inner workings and like the effort that goes into kind of concealing. And there's so many people out there that live that way that you just don't know about. And it's crazy. So what happened, just to kind of cover off on it at the pointy end, like how did you have your, for a lack of a better word, rock bottom moment, or the moment that you went, nah, I'm fucked, I need to go to rehab, or like how did that all
it wasn't my choice, mate. So I left Carlton at the end of 2008, I think it was, and didn't work for about 8 or 9 months. And my brother-in-law was into pubs, so he asked if we wanted to invest in a pub. It was a gaming venue, and gambling was a key part of my addiction as well. I jumped at it. My wife wasn't keen at all because I was taking our funding that we were going to buy a house with to get this business. So I went and ran the pub for 2.5 years probably, and that's when it went downhill really quickly. So it's a venue where I was, I didn't have any boundaries with it either. There was a lot of things that a lot of behaviours that I went to fund my habit. And I was probably using, to be explicit, probably a gram a day at that stage. So it's a fair amount of money and amphetamines I was putting in my system. And again, it was over those 3 years, it was just that sadness and just the miserable state of mind with the low self-worth and self-esteem, and like lack of purpose, and a few of those really hardcore things that are really hard to admit. But it wasn't me, mate. It was, I still thought I was going okay. But Nicole she said at beginning of 2011 that, she thought we were going two different paths in our lives, and we were. I was coaching a team, Heidelberg, through 2010, so I was barely home. I was working a few nights a week at the pub, 3 young kids, and I just wasn't present at home. So when I was home, I was just a body. I couldn't connect with any of them. It was just a really sad time for us as a family, but also, me individually. And Nicole got to the stage where she just had enough and said, "You need to leave." So I left and I moved in with my dealer. Again, probably not the greatest.
As you do.
Yeah, well, he's the only bloke only person that would have had me at that stage, basically. And again, this is Nicole's thinking different paths: alcoholism and gambling. That's what she knew I did. So she was thinking. She spoke to a few specialists over that month I was with my dealer, and she's the one that basically got it sorted out with Melbourne Private. So it was a semi-intervention. I didn't know what was going on. She said we were going to go and see the kids at school for something.
Oh, but she only thought it was about alcohol and gambling.
Yeah. She didn't know the drug use was a part of it. But thankfully, she listened to who she listened to, because she said, get him in here. And she drove me to Melbourne and basically dropped me off. And my thing was, people say, "What'd you stay for?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know why I stayed. I knew I certainly didn't want to live the way I was living, but I had no ability to live differently. So I just had, 1 or 2% of willingness to sit there and think, let's have a look at what's here." And that's my recollection. It may not be completely true, but that's how I remember it. And then the recovery started from there. And I was one of those ones, thank God, that I wasn't obsessed to use. Like we have people coming through sober living that can be obsessed to be using, 3-4 months being abstinent, which is just, I'd hate to think how painful that is when you're sitting in rehab and all you want to do is get out and use. For me, it was different, and I was okay to be able to sit there and engage and let the recovery process start. But even then, I laugh when I see Jack Warhoff from Malvern. I didn't tell him the truth for probably 2 weeks. So I go in there with the thinking, Gavin Corsica, AFL player, Collingwood, I can't admit to the drug use and the amphetamine use. So I'm happy for them to think it's alcohol. I'm happy for them to think it's gambling. That's okay. So I'm going to con the therapists at Melbourne as well. And by about the 2-week mark, I went into Jack and said, "Jack, my main addiction is not really alcohol and gambling. It's probably cannabis and amphetamines." And he said, "Yeah, look, we knew something was going on. We knew we hadn't got the whole story." So I wasn't even honest with them to start with. But then Nicole found out probably a week and a half later. So she found out the extent a week and a half later.
And what was her reaction? Did she kind of fall off her chair sort of thing?
Yeah, no, she was, look, her even dropping me in there, it was nervous breakdown type situation, because she just didn't know what the hell. And you know how confusing addiction is. Like, I've been working with sober living for 8 years, and it's still confusing for me, even to talk about. It's different for everyone. It's difficult for families and the addict themselves, and trying to manage that all is really hard. But she was shattered, completely broken, and I'm really fortunate and lucky that she even gave us the chance to rekindle and start something differently once I started getting well.
Amazing. It's such an interesting story, and I think the thing that I've sort of come to learn about myself and about other people as well, like when you said, why did you stay? And that's probably something that I always think is important for people to know as well, is that it's kind of one of the annoying things about addiction. Like they say, it comes out in these like destructive behaviors and this fucking bad attitude. Like, like when people check into rehab, like sometimes you just want to like slap them, you know what I mean? Because you're like, mate, stop giving me curry. Like, I'm trying to help you, buddy. Like stuff like that. But it's funny because it comes out like that. People think like, oh, he's just a wanker. He doesn't really want help or whatever it is. But like deep down, when you're at the stage that you're at, usually most people don't want to be doing what they are doing anymore, but they just don't know how to articulate it, ask for the help, and they're desperate
Jack,
for it.
I don't think I've ever met anyone that says, oh, they come in saying, hey, Gav, how you going? And give me a high five and say, what a great day to go to rehab. Like, no one does that. So most of us are stooped in so much denial as well. Like, no matter how bad the consequences are, it's never as bad. And, the drill, unless you're in hospital or you've passed away, that's our rock bottom. We can just keep having those rock bottoms. Like, we don't believe in a rock bottom. We just believe in many, many rock bottoms until you're dead, basically. Yeah. And no one wants to go into rehab. It's just the fact of the matter. But we hope, from our perspective, and it's what I've learned also, that if you can stay long enough in a service like ours or support like ours or whatever it may be, when the shift happens, like when you have that psyche shift or spiritual shift, whatever you want to, however you want to call it, spiritual awakening, it could be anything. If you can stay long enough to experience that and just a little hope, we talk about the self-esteem jar, sticking marbles in it, do esteemable acts. It's like this hope. Like, as soon as you get a little bit of hope, like that can flourish into more hope. And I think that's what we need when we're first coming in, because I don't know anyone that comes in being really hopeful about it being successful. Like, it's just it's a miserable disease, miserable behaviors that come from our drug use and alcohol use. It's just horrible. Like, you're a horrible person, Jack, when you're using. Like, simple. So was I. Like, in all our different ways. And that's just what it does to us. And you talk about the stigma that's attached to addiction. It does my head in too, mate. I obviously see your podcasts and read your stuff, and like the stigma in Australia, more so than the US, I guess, is what I know of. Like, it's still so shaming. Like, we do drug and alcohol interventions where we support a family member trying to get a loved one who's in complete denial into treatment. And the stigma attached to these families and what they think of the addiction is just horribly wrong. Like, 80% of people that go to treatment for the first time in the States go through an intervention. Like, we're still really shaming and judgmental, and like, it's just shitty. It makes it really hard for people to go, oh, I'm fucked. And let's go and get some help. Like, we don't have many of those here in Australia yet. But hopefully, with the more we talk about it and the more, I guess, profiles that come out and say, hey, I struggled and this is what I've done to get well and blah, 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 we'll continue to move in the right direction, which I think we are. It's just really slow.
100%. And that's why, like, I'm super thankful for people like yourself, and there's others as well that, do have that profile, because I kind of equate it a lot to like the mental health, movement that's happened. We're just sort of, I feel like we're in those early phases where it's slowly kind of shifting, and it's just going to take like a bit of a landslide of people with profiles to stand up and say, yeah, hey, and then it'll start to shift. Like the one that it's still like, I'm such a fucking idiot. I'm still a fanboy. Like, the other day I went to like that event in the city, the Rethink Addiction thing, and I wasn't going to go. And then they got him on. I didn't even know, but like Dame Beams was a speaker on the thing. And I knew that he came out and talked about his like mental health and stuff, but I didn't know there was anything there with like addiction. I'm not speaking out of school because he was advertised on it on the stage, telling his story and all that. So the more people like, and I was just like, what a fucking awesome guy for doing that. Cause I know how hard it would be if you have a profile and you're trying to get things to do, because now what I see with people with profiles that I talk to privately and stuff, they come out and say that they have a mental health issue when really they just got a big drug problem or an alcohol problem.
It's so frustrating, mate. It's so like, and I think you're right. We've come so far over the last decade, I reckon, in terms of that mental health wording, like with depression and anxiety and that sort of stuff. And men are now finding it a little bit more okay to go, hey, I'm struggling this way. That macho ego that I grew up with from my dad and his grandfather, where nothing's wrong, shut up, you idiot, I can get on with it, whatever.
Yeah.
But that's disappearing. So men can feel safer to be more vulnerable. But I completely agree, mate. Call it for what it is. Well, I get it. The mental health, depression, anxiety, I get it. There's generally something underlying you and I. So we generally will have some sort of mental health component, but you use drugs and alcohol, it just exacerbates it and makes it 100 times worse. So I completely agree. Let's I've got a mental health concern, but you know what? I medicated that with fucking heroin, meth, amphetamines, whatever, and I become a drug addict. Yeah. I've become so reliant on the drugs, I was addicted. So let's use the word addiction or whatever the good word to use is and call it for what it is. I wholeheartedly agree, because you hear about it even maybe stepping out of school here with the AFL, like it's mental health reasons. Well, no, it's not. He's a drug addict. He's using cocaine or he's a drug user. But it's still because of that shame. It's 100%. That judgment and that shame. It's really wrong. And that's what's going to keep this industry in the dark ages. Until we can sort of open it up where people just go, yep, I'm addicted. Give me some help. It's going to be the same. Yeah,
100%. 100%. Couldn't agree more. So the other thing that I just wanted to quickly talk about, because it sounds like it was a big part of your story and something that you do now, which I think, is really important, something that needs to come more into fruition in Australia, is that intervention side of things, because when you look at like the spectrum of drug use and you get into those ends of like when it's an addiction, a big component of that, as you said, is denial. And sometimes by not sticking our hand in the fire and trying to pull people out, like we let them kind of burn. Do you reckon? Like, is that something that you want to see change?
Look, families in general, the research and the information we have is that when someone in your family sort of notices something and goes, geez, that's not quite right with Jack, his behaviour or what he's doing, by the time they actually do something positive or productive about it, they generally say it's between 5 and 7 years. Yeah. So in that 5 or 7 years, if you've started off just starting to probably use and mum or dad are starting to see the changes and so forth, if they can do something different in year one, like you don't become fully blown addicted by year 7 and completely hopeless and helpless and messy. So
that's right. And then even on top of that, like what you said, that 5 to 7 year part, when I was watching that Addicted Australia SBS show or whatever, they were saying that on average, when you average it out, there's 18-year delay in help seeking once you actually get to that 7-year point and you make contact with the service. So it's crazy to let people keep going on, isn't it?
It is. And the intervention process is about bringing the pink elephant that all the families see, bring that, and the pink elephant is the addict in the family or the person that's behaving the way they're behaving, bring the elephant into the middle of the room and actually let everyone in the family be able to support and love this person. So when that process isn't in place, the pink elephant's out there doing what they want to do, behaving the way they want to behave, and then the family, they're almost behaving like addicts anyway. They're manipulating, they're splitting, they're doing all the things, because they're not sure on what's happening over there. And should I tell him? Does he need to know? There's too many secrets. There's dishonesty. It's just that web of addiction that you and I wrapped around our families. Like you did the same thing to your mum and people associated with you, and tangled them into the addiction web. And that's what happens. That's why families get so unwell, because they step back. Nicole stepped back at certain stages and said, what? She thought she was going mad. Yeah. Like she only knows now that she wasn't, but during it, she thought with the shit that I used to say and the lies and the cons and the manipulation, she legitimately thought she was going crazy. And that's a knack of what we do. But the reason why I did that was to keep her away and to keep her, further away from the truth and not knowing what was really going on for me.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it's so interesting. And I actually couldn't agree more. I think that the way that we intervene and the space to just kind of do like what they do in suicide prevention, where they put heaps of work into families to upskill them, to notice the signs, because, people might go to a service for an hour or 2 hours a day. They don't go to rehab, but then the family's left with them for, the rest of the hours, so, and they're the ones that bear the brunt of the addiction or the drug use. Yeah.
And that's the other component of when you go through the intervention. Belinda's been very successful with hers. The other component of it is that once we have the family together and we don't go to the intervention, we don't believe in that component of it. When the family can actually do that with their loved one, it's a really loving, caring space. And if they don't go, at least the addict knows that the family are there. Yeah. So they may go out and still behave the way they're doing, but then you can start helping the family change, because we offer a 3 to 6 month aftercare plan program for all of them. Yeah. But if the addict doesn't go into recovery, we support the family in helping them set their boundaries and what they, how they want to live their life without being entangled with that. So, and I think as soon as one person in the family can change, like you would have heard about the roles that people in families play, whether you're the enabler or whoever it may be in the family, if it's dad who's the really strict one, once dad can become really soft and vulnerable with his son who's an addict, that just changes the dynamics. So it's about all of us being able to change and do things differently.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's a massive segment of the space that's not looked at and there's no attention put into it. So just going back, because I think it's interesting. It's something that everyone, I think, wants to hear about. And please do it as much as you can without getting yourself into trouble and all that sort of stuff, of course. But the show's called Real Drug Talk. We try and be honest here. Let's talk about Melbourne, but I'm sure it happens in all cities across Australia, all places in the country, any sporting code. But if I'm talking about AFL, everybody knows, right? Just in friendship circles, if you go to a barbecue or something, you're talking about the footy or whatever, people will say to you, oh yeah, that player, he's fucking on it, or everybody knows who's doing what. But then when it gets to the level of actually meaningfully having the conversation in those sporting communities or in the community at large, it doesn't happen, So would you how much of a problem is drug use or addiction in that professional sporting realm from what you've seen? Is it something that occurs regularly? Is it something that happens?
I don't really know, simply because I don't know what the drug testing statistics are. But that's a conversation in itself in terms of what players do, and I would just put it down as the general population rules. And I think recently it was 15% use illicit substances, 25% drink alcoholically. Yep. So if we just even roll with that, that means there's a lot of
there's going to be a percentage.
15% of 800 players. There's many that are using it, not a once off, but more regularly. Yeah. So the illicit drugs policy is in place to try and protect them and to support the players that do dabble and do that. When you talk about addiction, the biggest addiction issue I think the AFL have when players are playing is gambling.
Oh, 100%. We've had Alan Christensen on talking about that. Amazing to hear. Crazy.
Yeah. So the alcohol is a component of it. I don't know whether you can become addicted to alcohol really quickly. I think alcohol is that longer term addiction. 100%. That's why you see alcoholics come in as 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, because they've worn it out, they functioned and so forth. Gambling for, the guys may use some coke or some pills or whatever. That's, neither here nor there. But the gambling situation, when they do have accessible funds, that is really dangerous. And I'm sure you agree with what I'm about to say, Jack, as in, it doesn't matter, well, for me, I should say, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's gambling, whether it's meth, whether it's amphetamines, whether it's cannabis, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex, whether it's running, whether it's shopping, whatever it is. Because I've crossed that line into addiction, I've got to be careful of all those other things. 100%. And swapping the witch for the bitch type thing. So these guys have gambling issues, and let's just call them a problem gambler while they're playing. Yep. When you retire and you transition into the normal life and get out of the AFL bubble, and your wage drops by 2/3, you've got a wife, you've got kids, you've now got a mortgage that you used to be able to afford, but now you may not be able to afford. and you don't have any skills to work unless you've been able to get some sort of business behind you, which not many are able to. I'm not sure the percentages, but wouldn't be 90% of players leave footy and have a business to go to. So they're underskilled and underpaid and all those sorts of things. Like, that's just it's an addiction nightmare waiting to happen.
Yeah. Perfect storm.
And that transition into life is, and we can talk about this as well, what I'm sort of supporting our Collingwood past players a little bit with, or we're wanting to put in more plans and strategies and programs so that we can actually really basically have that net and catch them before anything happens, and have a business networking and just opportunities for them. So during footy careers, I don't, and again, I was a little bit different because I believe I was addicted. I was an addict before I picked up. So there's still a few of them out there, I'm sure, as in with the genetic disposition and so forth. Yep. But I don't think they will generally become addicted to drugs while they're playing unless they have those predispositions. But the gambling will certainly set the tone for that when they do finish, and it's you know what it's like. It's a huge rush, but it's in terms of gambling addiction, it creates and causes the worst amount of suicides out of any addiction. Yeah,
100%. It's the gambling thing is crazy to me. And just
Why?
Well, because I think it's scary for me without pumping it up and over dramatizing it. But it's scary to me in terms of, like, drugs and alcohol are bad, and you can have, and it obviously affects your health and all that stuff. But like, just the lifelong negative position that you can put yourself in financially is like pretty scary, and when you add in that kind of addictive nature to it, and what I know, everything that comes along with that, like, it freaks me out for people when they have access to resources and money, just the trouble that they can get themselves into. Speaking to Alan, hearing his story, hearing David Schwartz over the years, I just think it's a pretty scary addiction, just because of the way that you can lock yourself in. And I know you had that going on as well. And I don't know if you agree with that, but just that behavioral aspect is kind of frightening to me. So,
well, it's the other component of that is because the word addiction is still that. Like, if it was spoken about more often and more frequently and more accessible, like, it may change that, because it's the same with, and we're going to a different area here now as well, in terms of the gambling advertising. Like, give me a fucking spell, mate. Like, if Sportsbet need to advertise for them to get people to gamble on their credit cards with them, they're kidding themselves. Take it off. Like, it is bullshit. And they say, oh, well, there's only the response, or the percentages of problem gamblers out there is only 9%.
No way.
Even if it is 9%, that's way too many, and they will make up for the next 30%. Like, it's just ridiculous. And going back to the AFL component, Jack, you can't, and from your basketball, you can't be successful and the best player you can be in your sport unless you have some of those tendencies. So
100%. This is what I was going to ask you about. Yeah.
So guys, we need to be obsessive with our diet. We need to be obsessive with how we're feeling and our bodies and our gym work and all that sort of stuff to be really good at it. So you add that on top of maybe a bit of gambling and then leaving the game, like as you said, or the term you use, the perfect storm. It's absolutely spot on. So, and the guys need to be taught, and I guess it needs to be spoken about more to let them know that there's dangers out there. Nicole used to say to me that you're living in an AFL bubble. Yeah. Like, you wait till you're out. I said, what do you mean it's a bubble? It's my employment. It's my work. I'll tell you what, the bubble bursts when I finish, that's for sure.
Yeah. So just quickly, like, I've spoken to a few players about that just over the time, but that transition, like, and I know, like, you were probably even in a slightly different era of it as well. Like, I would probably say, just from the outside looking in, it's even more so now. Like, it's so professionalized and intense. Like, how hard is it to actually transition out of, like, something where you kind of this isn't like an egotistical thing, but in particularly Melbourne, but across Australia in our culture, like, you're kind of held up on a pedestal in a lot of ways as a sporting person. As you said, you got access to resources, like people are doing things for you. Like, how hard is it to just then go into being your average kind of Joe, really, and out of that bubble?
Jack, the average Joe comes into the AFL system as an 18-year-old and basically is spat out at 23, 24 if they're lucky. They played probably 30 games. Wow. All their mates have finished their apprenticeships. All their mates have finished their uni degrees if they've gone to uni. Yep. All their other mates have been working for 3 or 4 years and have some sort of background in history. Well, these guys may make a few $100,000 in that first few years, but when they leave, they might be able to get $750 or $1,000 to a local footy club. But they don't have anything. They don't have skills. They don't have things that the real world require of them. And it can be really difficult. And as I said before with me, I had a 14-year career and a long career, and I went into coaching, and it was still fucked for me. Like, again, I took my addiction with me, so I think it's a little bit different or it may be a little bit different for me. But even me going into the profession I wanted to, and I was still looking for the kick or the hit or the medication or whatever it was for me. Even when I had those roles. So imagine what it's like for the kids that don't have that and don't have big careers. Like, if they're, and we talk about the vulnerable brain, Jack, let's not talk about a male brain, but addicts, your brain and my brain is probably fairly similar. We're a little bit more vulnerable than the normal brain. So we're a little bit more sensitive. Things affect us a little bit more. A loss of a job or a girlfriend, it's a bigger dagger to the heart and those sorts of things. So if those sorts of brains find a medication that can take that away or push it down or shove it aside, again, there's another perfect storm for issues. And I'm sure there's many of those young kids that are playing footy that think that they're going to have everything and have this huge career, and then all of a sudden, bang, it's cut short. And we had an example recently, or a couple of years ago, with a guy I played with, Chris Curran. He played until 94, played about 35 games. Yep. And Chrissy was just a fanatical, fit, just did everything he could, just was so passionate about footy, but had stress fractures in his feet. So he only played for 3 or 4 years, left, got his teaching degree and so forth. But he's had this hole in his heart, basically, or it's like he had a leg amputated, just his part of his life hadn't been fulfilled, and it wasn't wasn't his fault. Married and kids and whatever. Well, unfortunately, Chrissy started drinking and become alcoholic and depression and so forth. And he drove himself into a tree 2 years ago. Yeah. And all of this was a part of it. And I know it was because I spoke to his sister and his dad, and he was heartbroken that his career didn't happen. Yeah. And it was just the way he coped and medicated, and it became too much. And we don't want to see that happen. Like, I think the AFL or AFL clubs have a role to play, and they're big enough to be able to say, okay, this is what we've got to be able to support you so that sort of thing doesn't happen. And look, half the problem isn't getting engagement. It's like rehabs. Getting someone engaged is the hardest problem. So you can't force them, but as long as there's something there for them, if they want to engage, that you can actually connect them with that I guess is fulfilling and beneficial for them in the future.
Yeah. So just quickly on that before I ask you about the past player stuff, because I think that's interesting as well. Like, from my and tell me if you agree or not, but from my perspective, of course, there can always be more done, but I think like the AFL actually does a pretty good job with a lot of things, and they show some really good leadership, and particularly the drug policy and how they do it, and the privacy that they try and keep, and all that stuff is brilliant. I think it's really, really good actually. The problem I have is like the media. I just think like sometimes like I think like, oh, I would just love to like just see one of these journalists, particularly this. So I'm a footy fan, if anyone can't tell. So I watch stuff, and obviously I'm contributing to the problem because I'm actually fucking watching it, and that's why they report in the way that they do, because people watch it. But like the stuff that is going on at the moment with Willie Rioli, and just some of the other stuff about not just about drugs and alcohol, I might add, and it's probably reflective of the larger media as well. Well, it definitely is, but yeah, just how it's reported on, I think, is the problem around drugs and alcohol.
So I'm going to take you back a step, Jack. So when you talk about someone like the drugs policy, fantastic. It's anonymous. No one knows. I think by the time it gets to I'm just going to say the third strike. So when they get suspended, my belief is we need to know. So, and it's not we need to know to point the finger. We need to know so that we can open this up a little bit and that it's okay for this person to have this problem. So let's go and do some things to be able to fix it. So by keeping it secret is still manifesting in the same crap, I reckon. And it goes back to the drug situation. Like if someone has, and you may have seen it over the last few years. I know there was a big Sydney Swans player that missed a chunk of the last part of the year, and it was for mental health reasons. So it goes back to what we spoke about at the start. So I still find the AFL, and I don't know what happened, whether it was true, whether it was mental health, whether it was drug use or what it was, whether it was a hammy, I don't know. But I guarantee you they will not come out and say this person's missing the next month because we've suspended him because he's had two positive drug strikes. They won't say that. Leave the name out of it. But we'll find out eventually. But why don't they actually say this is what it's for? Instead, they come out and say it's mental health reasons. So it's still that messes with me still.
I agree. I do kind of agree with that, but I think before it does get to that step, there has to be some kind of intervention, like with the journalism side of the coin. That there's like
I reckon you're fighting a losing battle there, Jay.
I
hear you.
And the AFL wouldn't want to do that as well, because obviously, from a commercial standpoint, the more media, the more talk, the more dollars, the more the game grows. Like that's just obvious. But so that makes it hard. But I just sit there sometimes and I just think like, fuck, I'd hate to be that person. Like you just got these bananas that wouldn't know anything, just saying all this stuff, speaking to a couple of different people over the time and just what they're like. I just think it's really wrong and frustrating.
How do you reckon Bucks will be feeling at the moment?
Exactly.
He, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't read papers because he doesn't know what's going on outside. And that's and if he did know, mate, I'd hate to see what his mental health would be like or how bad that would affect him. And he's an old, cagey, experienced person who's been there, done that, and has copped more than I've ever heard any other player or coach cop before.
That's right.
So imagine when it happens to the younger guys. I completely agree, mate. I think they have a huge role to play. I think I read about Fraser Gehrig having a bit of a crack at Gary Lyon and someone else about comments that he'd made over his journey and how critical they used to give their worst votes for the game, Triple M. So they wouldn't give 3-2-1 as best players. They'd give 3-2-1 as in you're the worst player, you're the second worst, and you're the third worst. And they have no. And I agree with what Fraser Gehrig said. You don't have it. That wouldn't have affected me, but for many others, imagine getting worst on ground and it being on the radio on Triple M. Like you've just given your heart and soul. You played like a prick. Like you already know that you played shithouse, and now the whole world. Now you got voted worst on ground. Like that's horrible reporting. Like you just shouldn't be able to do that. But
no, I agree. So I think that is a really cool impact, like you said before, that you're doing with the Collingwood Footy Club, the past players. Be good to get you to explain about that. But just jumping back, when you first came out, when you did the Eddie interview, like, did you have a lot of like people from, just forget about the wider public, because obviously you did, but just like from that football realm, did you have a lot of people come to you and say, fuck Gav, I'm same thing, mate. Yeah, I'm struggling, all that sort of stuff?
As in with the same issues you're talking about?
Yeah, like drugs and alcohol, addictions.
No. Not really. Not from an AFL player perspective, no.
Interesting.
No.
Interesting. Yeah.
No. Look, when Benny Cousins was probably 7, I was probably a few years into my recovery, I was trying to get a bit of contact with his dad, Brian, and Ben, and to try and assist that. I don't think that was ever going to work. So I'm there, and certainly there. But I also have, like, I hear you talk, the people you speak to, like, recovery is so different for everyone. Even Dane Beams.
That's right. Yeah.
Dane Beams, his recovery ain't going to work for me. Like he paints and does mindfulness and all that sort of, like, that's I needed to go away and do a rehab for an extended period of time for me to rejig and rewire and think what the hell's going on. So I gave myself a chance, and then the 12 step. Like I don't think Dane does anything. Like I encouraged him 18 months ago to go overseas, utilise the AFL, the AFLPA, and do it properly, so you don't have to ever come back. And I don't know whether that happened or whatever, but so we all have our own recovery. I take my hat off to people that walk into the 12-step fellowship just off the street and stop using or drinking. And then stay clean and sober. Again, I can't do that. So we all have a different component, I guess, with what recovery is or what our recovery activities are or what keeps us in recovery.
100%. Couldn't agree more. And I think it's a great thing, but it's one of the challenges that we have as well, to make broad stroke solution for people. But so what are you doing with the past players stuff at Collingwood?
So I guess it's just an add-on to some of the stuff we've been speaking about previously. Like Chrissy Curran was an instigator of part of this. Paul Tuddenham, our president, has had a vision for over 10, 15 years. He was one of those guys in my era that would rock up at 4:45 after working 8 hours and then train and play. So that was that semi-professional type move into. And Tuddy only played 40 or 50 games or whatever, so he didn't have a big career, but was certainly looking at his career after footy. And he's just seen people falling off. He's falling off the wagon and really struggling in life once that happens. So the vision has been there for us to provide, I guess, more resources, more avenues, change the culture, I guess. I'm also helping the VFL coaching group with our second tier guys, so I can get to know them more. So I'm in their face a little bit, so they just don't see this old grey-haired bloke over there that used to play. They sort of see me around and know that I'm there, that once they finish playing with us, there's a component of what we can support them with education, job networking, work experience, mental health and well-being, whatever it may be. We want to build an organisation that basically is there for them to fall back on. Because when you get recruited to a footy club, all you hear about is once you're a Magpie for life. We want to make that commitment and say that, once you're there, you're committed for life, and you never have to leave, basically. And from our also perspective, being, I guess, from a club perspective and a little bit selfish, like, can you imagine if I went and saw your son who's about to be born, Jack, in 17 years' time and said, hey, Jack, we want to recruit your son to Collingwood. He's going to have this. We hope he has this sort of career. But you know what? When he finishes, like, there's Gav Corsica and a network of 10 other people that are providing jobs, education, all that sort of stuff behind the scenes, so that when he does finish, he's going to be set up anyway.
100%. That's amazing.
How's that for a recruiting tool? Like, you just go there, and of course they're going to come to us if they know that we're holistically supporting about the person after their guys as soon as they finish. So and I get it too. Like, when you play footy, like once you get cut, you're cut. Like, your value as a commodity is finished. So, and I completely understand that. So that's fine, but we want to make sure that the players know that once that happens, have the shits with their club. That's fine. You're going to, but don't have the shits with us. We're here to support and carry the baton for you. And when you talk about a cultural shift, that's the shift we're wanting to change, so that they know me and they see me, and you are with us for life. You're not just playing for 5 or 6 or 7 years. You're playing for 5 or 6 or 7 years, and then for the next 60, you're with our past players.
Yeah, I love that. It's fantastic. It's actually it's really really good, because it's a big problem with anything that requires so much dedication and obsession and focus. It's like, there's no plan B. So to have something kind of waiting there to catch them and work with them in the time, it's awesome. So,
and one of the challenges we do have is, like, where do you fit it in? Like, how do we encourage these? Like, you look at Brodie Grundy, he's done his degree and he's got his law degree over 7 years.
How amazing is that? Jeez.
Like, there's 1 or 2% of players in the AFL will actually have that motivation, and that's awesome. But I'm telling you that, the other, there's probably 90% of guys that when they have their day off, which they get 1 day off a week, they want to have a day off. Like, they don't want to study or do work experience. So that's the challenge we have of being able to work it in somehow, so that there's some sort of, they get some sort of idea of what they want to do. That's half the problem as well. No, they don't know what the hell they want to do. And that's fair enough as well.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So that's the sporting side of things and your connection to like the AFL. For the last, what has it been, like 8 years or 9 years or maybe even 10? Eight. You've been running Sober Living. Like, what was the idea behind that originally, and what are you guys doing with that? Because I think even that, when you think about it in the context of what we have in Melbourne or Australia, like that's unique as well, and it fills a gap. Yeah.
So I met Belinda 8 years ago on SEN when I used to do that the radio program with Mark Ryan and your mate Mickey Hall. So Belinda came on as an interventionist and family member, and we really connected. And I wasn't working at that stage; I was just doing my diploma. She offered me a role with a place called the Recovery Foundation to help her and so forth. And the guys had about a half a dozen people or clients in a house up at the basin, and used to commute them down daily for like a day program type thing. And 3 months later, these blokes said, "We're done. We're not paying anymore." And there was 6 people living in this house, thinking, where are we going to go? So Belinda basically went and rented a house locally, and we started Sober Living there. It was really ad hoc and out of the blue, and we just sort of held it for those clients. And as you said, over the last 8 years, we built it up from probably a 5-bed capacity to at stages we had 21 beds when we had the Frankston Charity House.
Wow.
We're back down to about 11 now. So we have a couple of houses in the Carnegie Murrumbina area where we basically run a residential inpatient addiction and alcohol program. We do all the rehab stuff. We'll do your peer evals, and we'll do process groups, and we'll do check-in groups, and try and provide a safe, supportive environment so they can do the work. It's certainly not a place where we do the work for them and so forth. So we just encourage them to have that opportunity. And look, it's hard, mate. It's really difficult. And I guess over the last 2 years, I've gone to 3 days a week, and that sort of gives me a good balance. It's when I was doing 5 days a week with the crew, it's pretty taxing on the mind and the burnout, because you know how hard you would have been in the 100%. First 3 to 6 months of your recovery. The behaviours are pretty difficult and so forth. And we understand. I'm not judging them. It's just what it is. But it can be really difficult. But we believe in a long-term approach. And unfortunately, we can only cater for a certain demographic of people who can fund $10,000 a month, basically. It's a 3-month minimum. But as soon as you get in here, if you're staying for 3 months, we're going to encourage you, if you can afford it, to stay for 6. Because our outcomes show that 80% of our clients that stay 6 months or longer are getting to 12 months and really free and changing their life completely. And we sort of push that to start with, but then if people can't afford it, we want them to stay involved somehow. So that aftercare component, being attached, supported, accountable to a group can also help. But you need to spend, from our point of view, we believe you need to spend that time where you can really have that shift and that change. And I spoke about it. For me, it was my first-hand experience. I could have stayed longer when I first started 10 years ago, but financially couldn't, and family and so forth. So we get that component. But if you can, we just say, just sit put and just do what you have to do, and you'll give yourself that chance. And look, relapse is supposedly a part of this. I'm not sure. Did you have a lapse in your recovery?
No, I haven't. Or not since I would say properly engaged in services, and went to Malvern and met that kind of lived experience and had that magic happen for me.
So you and I are very special, mate. There's not many of us.
I know, that's right.
But I don't get that. Like I did what I was told, even though I thought they were fuckwits, and I thought, fuck you, fuck that, no, blah blah blah. I just did it though. I reckon if you can just pull your head out of your ass to start with, and just do what you're told, the chances of you making it are so far greater. And lapsing doesn't have to be a part of it. It just doesn't have to be. I think we can fall back into the excuse of, it's a relapsing condition, but I have one last crack or whatever. Like for some people, you have one last crack and that's it. You're in a box and you're gone. So that's a key area for us.
Well, that's good. Yeah. And I like that, because I agree. Over the years, that's probably where my mind has shifted to it, is that yes, it is true that relapse is kind of a part of this whole process. However, I feel like as professionals in the space or as people working with people, sometimes not intentionally, but we can kind of create these self-fulfilling prophecies and belief systems for people and leave these loopholes and back doors open that says like, just like you said, it's a relapsing condition.
Little reservations, they call them, Jack.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, I see it all the time. Like people just kind of, leave that back door open and they go for it. For me, like, and that's why I'm like so big on the whole, like lived experience thing and the peer side of it, because, there was lots of little things, but really like the thing that kind of hooked me in early was guys like you, like coming back to what we started with. It's the truth. Like I did one of these shows with Jason Bowman before, he was kind of around me a lot. I thought he was fucking cool. You, another mate, Benny, like it was just that. And that really helps me to kind of progress do it. Keep going. And I think that's the important part. So, and
it's very easy to stop doing what we need to do. And I get it even at 10 years. Like I can fall back into, I can't be bothered doing my AA meeting this week. And then Nicole will text me and say, you're doing it. And I say, oh, okay. And I drag my ass there again or whatever it may be. Like that's human nature to take the easy option anyway. But, if we can stick, and I have to stick to it as well. I can't, like I did the steps once. I'm not going to ever do them again.
Yeah,
like that's just my thing. If someone wants to do them 5 times, that's awesome. Yeah. But I certainly have 10, 11, 12 in my life where I practice all that sort of stuff, and I live completely differently. And I'm not going to say I'm a saint in terms of that 12-step philosophy, but I certainly live a part of it, and it's different from the way I used to live.
Awesome, mate. Hey, well, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it, and mate, we'll have you back on again soon. But good to chat to you again. It's been ages in between, I won't say drinks, in between wickets. So be good to chat more, mate. Thanks for coming on.
No problem, and well done for baby coming, and give your wife a cuddle and kiss for me, and congratulate her and support her, Jack. And
I will.
Wake up at night time for that baby and do all those things.
Yeah.
Now that you're a good human.
he's not getting a Collingwood beanie, all right? Strictly the Tigers. So
send me your address. I might send you a little pack.
No worries. Thanks, Gav. Appreciate it,
good
mate.
Stuff.
See ya.
Jack.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey YouTube watcher, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you and your family are doing well in these extraordinary times. I also want to ask you, can you please subscribe and hit the bell notification? We're really launching into our YouTube channel this year and want to build our audience so that we can progress through the ranks and basically get the message of recovery and hope and change and all that good stuff out there to as many people as we can. So we would love it if you would consider it and subscribe and help us out. Also, for anyone seeking help and information and resources, we've put together a 100% free online course that you can access. Link in the description. So if you are looking for help, hope that is something that can help you out as well. Until next time, see you in the next video. Peace.